So welcome back to participants. Welcome again to this deep dive session. So from wherever you're following us, with our sprinter, Marie-Cécile Zinsou, president of the Fondation Zinsou, and Manouchehr Shamsrizi, co-founder of Game Lab Berlin at the Hermann von Helmholtz Zentrum für Kulturtechnik at the Humboldt University of Berlin. My name is Fabian, and I will be your host for this deep dive as well. We are very happy that Marie and Manouchehr are with us. I would just like to explain how you can participate in this deep dive, so how you can ask your questions, because this is the audience space to ask their questions. If you have a question, there are 3 ways to include them in this discussion. The first one is via direct audio in this webinar. Please click on the raise your hand icon, which you can find in the menu bar at the bottom of your screen. As soon as it is your turn, I will call you by name and enable your audio. Please unmute yourself so that you can ask your question. And as soon as you have asked it, we will turn it off again. So your video won't be used. No worries about that. If you prefer, you can also ask your question in the chat of this webinar, or use our online form at campus.re-publica.com, campus.re-publica.com, and we will include those questions as well. I would say let's begin. Manouchehr, I would ask you for your statement on Marie's sprint.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me. Once again, trying to make this provocative, as this is our aim to have the dialogue turned into a discussion. But before I do so, I want to say that I was very moved by what Marie said, and I believe there was one statement, one mindset behind the project we have just heard about that really has the potential to turn around the whole debate. I know that's big words, but I'm trying to give substance to them. Instead of asking why, what entertainment can do and what the risks are and so on, turning the question around as Marie did and asking why would a museum be a boring space in the first place? That is very powerful, and I believe it's the way to go, because you would not be able, I would argue, to come up with a very fundamental and substantial reason to argue that museums need to be a boring place. So that is exactly, I believe, the mindset we need. I was also impressed by the not very easy scalable idea of connecting the work of a museum in such a setting and elsewhere with the rituals and traditions of the society the museum is part of, and of the community the museum is part of, like that annual customs event Marie told us about. That, of course, there are risks, but the potential and the opportunities for a museum and its outreach and its democratization of who joins, who will become, to speak in Marie's terms, the new friends that then will join you at home, or to say so in the museum, outweighed by much the risks of cultural issues when working in this way with your community. So I believe that is a very clever approach, and it's a very valuable approach, keeping in mind that there are risks, like, for example, the royal aspect of such an event that most probably would need to be discussed in its historical circumstances as well. And finally, another very valuable input we heard from Marie, I believe, was the turnaround of the dialogue of North and South. That is something that we, to say so, in the world of tech innovation and of digital transformation, partly have discussed a lot over the last year, because it turns out that many innovations do not happen in the to say so conservative, well saturated world of, for example, Western Europe, but issues like mobile payment have been developed elsewhere and then re-imported to Western Europe. So there are no reasons that this should not also apply to modern democratic, inclusive outreach models of running a museum and the collection. So that change of the relationship of North and South is of high value. And again, trying to provocate, but I was too impressed to do so. And I can only suggest that we all stick with the question, why would the museum be a boring space in the first place, instead of only asking why it should be a fun place.
Well, thank you very much for that already interesting insight. I would like to take the first question that came in through our online tool at campus.republica.com. And Harald is asking whether you integrated the ancient tradition of annual customs of the kings of Benin to your work at the museum, where the treasures of the court were put at public display or adapted in some way. So how are your experiences with this?
I'm sorry, because I just heard the beginning of the question and I don't see it written. So you told me, how did I import the...
No problem, I can repeat it. Don't worry.
Yeah, thank you.
Did you integrate the ancient tradition of annual customs of the kings of Benin to your work at the museum, where the treasures of the court were put on public display or adapted in some way? So how were your experiences with that?
Well, so as we discovered this, those annual customs, well, the most important part of it, I didn't really have time to speak about it, was human sacrifice. So obviously we did not use the annual custom tradition exactly as it was, but we used the idea of the works of art going to see the people and not the people going to the museum to see. So we did a lot of exterior exhibition, like thinking, where do people go on weekends? They go to the football stadium. So we moved our exhibitions during the weekend at the football stadium. Where do you go after work in Cotonou, which is next to the sea? You go to the beach. So we moved some photo exhibition at the beach. So we tried to use this this tradition of going to the works, going to see the people. We tried to modernize it, but we didn't do the full annual custom program, which is kind of more difficult to put in place in the 21st century.
Marie is asking, what should future generations learn, as you use the term of excuse me, where is it? What should future generations learn to develop narratives for a common history, as you mentioned the term of a generation being very much framed by the post-colonial discourses, or especially by colonialism?
Well, this is probably one of the most important questions that we are facing in Benin today. How do you get out of this post-colonial relationship with the rest of the world? And I think the first thing you need is really to understand your own history. And that is probably our major problem today. Today, we don't have access to our history and to our culture. Having very few museums that are expensive, that are not in the capital city where people live, but everywhere in the country where there are very, very few inhabitants. How do you connect to the people? How do the people connect to their history? And how do you know your culture? Because I think the reason why you live with your colonial memory is that you only know that, because it's written everywhere. The colonial history is written in every French book. It's in everybody's eyes. Even today, European people look at us with the idea of the colonization. If you don't know your history, you're not very strong, and you must admit the other's history. So that's what we're thinking all the time about, and that's why we've done some historical exhibition. We've worked with the Museum of the Quai Branly, and we've had Beninese collection coming to Benin 12 years ago, and we did exhibitions with private collectors about our history, our heritage, and we've been working a lot on the heritage questions, even though we're a contemporary art museum, but we've still been working on the heritage questions, because I feel children must understand where they come from to understand where they're going.
And Manouchehr, in your experience, because you was working as a researcher, sort of, is that something that is relevant for you as well, on how to develop new narratives? Because I know that you're doing that in the gamification and by telling or developing storylines for imaginative futures. So maybe you can
to pick up on that. No, I cannot answer that, but I can paraphrase the question. That's all, I'm afraid. But to build up on what Marie said, I believe gaming is in a similar situation to contemporary art, maybe because, of course, there are discussions on narratives, and we should not be fooled. All of cultural mediums that are out there transport narratives, and there are competitions of narratives going on, and that doesn't go away by not watching it. So if contemporary art collections do not search for their own position in regards to narratives that we need to tell or understand on how society relates to its history, and if game developers or the gaming ecosystem doesn't do so, that doesn't mean that there aren't narratives that are transported. So I think it's very valuable to and also necessary to have that perspective of what narrative is transported, what narrative is used, because there's always a narrative in any cultural technique, including contemporary art, that might not have the issues of an ethnographical collection, or including games that might think that they are not that in that problematic sphere of transporting a narrative. And to finish, I believe what would be really valuable, and we see that in this Martin-Roth-Symposium already, and I would love to see more of that, would be to really have a transdisciplinary and transmedia perspective on this, because maybe the museums and the contemporary art collections and games and book publishers and Disney, which we have heard from earlier today, these are all different mediums, but they face the same challenges. They are now much more political than they used to be. They should have been political before, but now they are finally to some degree, and we might be able to learn from each other because the challenges might be similar. I would, from what I heard from Marie earlier and now in her Q&A, I would totally believe that games are facing similar challenges as cultural techniques than contemporary art collections face, and we might learn from each other how to handle that. And then the to say so ancient ethnographical collections find their own way, and then we can talk with them as well. Yeah, it's interesting to see the similarities of new progressive art forms in relation to these challenges.
I have one more question through our online tool. Andrea is asking, apparently technology is the future for the cultural sector. The main challenge is accessibility and participation for a broader audience. How can we succeed to not leave people behind? For example, older people, how do we tackle the challenge in your museum?
Sorry, the question is for me, or I think?
Yeah, this question is for you.
Sorry. Well, it's one of the challenges we're facing too in Benin, because it's even though the mobile phone is almost everywhere, and people are more connected on social media. And we have a lot of issues with people, not only older people. We have the questions of people not speaking the same language. We have 68 different languages in the country. So how do you connect to people who speak a Norse language or a South language, but don't speak French, which is the national language, but not everybody speaks French? How do we connect with very young children? How do we connect with people who live in the countryside, quite far away from the city? We have all those questions, and we answer not only by technology. We answer with a bus going to pick up the children and going to the schools and meeting with the schools. We do a lot of work around schools. We do various languages program. We have an app with 17 different language from our region. So we always face the question of how do we get to people, and how do we meet with people who might be excluded. That's the work we do most in the foundation.
Thank you very much for your time. I see no more questions at this point, so I would let this deep dive end right now. Manouchehr is still with us for the next deep dive. Thank you very much for your time and also for your very interesting sprint, I think. And the next deep dive will be with Pili. It will be the last deep dive for today, and I hope to see you there in about 1 minute.